Excellent. Welcome to another edition of Mile High Huddle. My name is Luke Polglaze. As always, I'm joined by Chad Jensen to give you the latest Broncos breakdowns and previews. Today, we are here to discuss the Broncos win 30, or excuse me, over the Chiefs 24-17. And as always, I'm joined by Chad, the publisher of Mile High Huddle. Chad, good to have you with us as always.
Hey, what's up, Luke? Good to be here. Hey, just real quick, I want to let everybody know that we've got our Facebook page up and rolling for Mile High Huddle. Facebook.com/ Mile High Huddle. We'd appreciate it if you come like us on Facebook and help us grow that side of our social media.
Absolutely. So good to have you with us here, and good to be talking Broncos, and good to have that on Facebook.
Absolutely. So, Chiefs Broncos, what were your impressions, your takeaways from Sunday's weird game?
It was a weird game indeed. Well, first of all, I think if the Broncos are going to duplicate a performance like that, it had better not happen against the Seahawks of the world. Otherwise, we're gonna get it torn to pieces. The Broncos are just shredded. The defense came out flat, never improved. A performance like that will beat the Raiders, but I'm just concerned about that kind of style against most other teams. The Broncos were just flat overall.
Yeah. I mean, I was encouraged in the first half. I thought, here we go, because one of my biggest complaints, and I think a lot of people's complaints of the 2013 Broncos, was that, we would get out to slow starts and then come roaring back in the second half. It's really been ironic how since Peyton Manning, joined the Broncos, the franchise has been taken to, new heights, and we're in the stratosphere of records, the Super Bowl, even though we lost, and all that. But the irony is that since that time, I can maybe think of, probably count the games on one hand, how many complete games where the team, as a complete unit, all three phases, played 60 minutes of football. And
Hmm.
I mean, I wrote about this early on in the week when I was doing my reaction piece on that game, that I think it really comes down to almost an institutional level, or a coaching level. It's the leadership of the team. Not, and who knows how that's being reflected and how they communicate to the team, coaching, meeting rooms, the whole shebang. But I think it's at the highest level. Del Rio, Fox, Gase, all of them have to reevaluate that aspect of it, because, like you just said, you might be able to get away with that with the Kansas City Chiefs. You might be able to get away with it, with the Raiders. And the Seahawks, however, will not be forgiving of a team who does not play a full 60 minutes, because you better believe that they will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what it comes down to for me, the defense, there's so much talent. Obviously, went out, made some major additions in free agency, in the draft. Great talent on this defense, but it's still not performing. To me, it comes down to the coaching. Um, to me, the most disappointing aspect, you could say most disappointing player, but I'm going to put it on Coach Jack Del Rio. The Broncos defense has just consistently been flat, haven't been able to get pressure, haven't been able to really put themselves in a position to win. I think ultimately that's a coaching thing, and ultimately that's on Jack Del Rio.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just from a scheme perspective and a mindset, but I mean, these guys are playing totally undisciplined. I mean, you got Quanterra Smith jumping the snap and negating an Aqib Talib pick six that would have absolutely slammed the door on the Chiefs. Those type of things, they have to be addressed, and they have to be taken care of at the highest level. I was listening to some of John Fox's press conferences post game and since the game, and
Mm-hmm.
he's really defending the fact that, hey, what's everybody complaining about? We won the dang game. And there is something to say for a team that can play or win ugly, not play at their best, not play a full 60 minutes and still come out with the W. There is something to say about that. However, John Fox, I think, is deluding himself if he doesn't recognize that there are some really key things missing as far as the ingredients that make this any team in the NFL a championship caliber team. My only hope at this stage is that the season is young. There's a lot of new faces. Um, it takes time to gel, and I think we have to be cognizant of that. It does take time for the players and scheme and everything to come together when there's that many new faces, and it's a fresh new year. So hopefully we'll see some signs of that this week versus the Seahawks.
Absolutely. I've had several conversations with Broncos fans on Twitter saying a win is a win, and every team has serious issues. But if you can't handle business against what effectively was the Kansas City Chiefs B team, they're an 0-2 squad. I'm worried. The Broncos have to be worried if that's the case.
Yeah. I understand both sides of the argument. The side that, hey, listen, in the NFL, a win's a win's a win's a win. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, 2 weeks in a row, the Broncos get out to a commanding lead, and in the second half, they come out flat. They don't execute. They play without focus, and the team gets back in the game. Now, fortunately, the defense, that whole bend, don't break mentality has been able to save them, at the end of the day when the chips were down. But like I said, man, teams like the Seahawks who thrive in those high-pressure, clutch situations, they won't fail in those. They'll come through. I mean, we saw that time and time again. We've seen it ever since Russell Wilson joined that team. There's just been a whole new level of focus and swagger and commitment to winning. They're willing to do whatever it takes, and it shows out on the grass.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that said, there were a few, to my mind, positive aspects of the game. Chad, your take on those?
I really liked what I saw from Brandon Marshall. There's a couple things that he needs to work on, like honoring his assignments and not being so eager to bite on fakes and play actions, and really just having the discipline to honor your assignment. And a lot of that just comes down to game experience. We've got to remember that, up until week one, just a little over a week ago, Brandon Marshall never started a game in the NFL, let alone seen the amount of, snaps that he has seen. He basically hasn't left the field in 2 straight games.
He hasn't. He's played every down.
And we have to keep that in mind. And, with that thought and perspective that he's inexperienced, he's raw, I think it helps to appreciate even more the type of production that he's had on the field. He leads the team with 18 tackles, just like the guy who he's replacing did last year at the weak side linebacker, Danny Trevathan. So it's nice to see Brandon Marshall making plays and living up to the guy who he's replacing, even though it's on the short term. I think the question is, when Trevathan comes back, and there's no doubt when he does come back, the Broncos are putting him right back where he belongs in the starting lineup. But what do you do with Marshall? Because I think his play, at least up to this point, is probably going to force the Broncos to figure out ways to put him on the field.
Mm-hmm. Right off the bat, I think he's a nickel backer. He's a great coverage linebacker. So I think you're going to see him in the mix there. Part of me wants to say put him in the base defense instead of Irving. On the other hand, though, Irving is just so solid against the run. It's an interesting dilemma, and it's certainly one I think the Broncos are going to have to wrestle with.
Yeah, and especially it's one of those things where, the team itself, the organization, as well as the fans, we've been waiting patiently for this opportunity for Nate Irving to finally take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and do essentially what he was drafted to do, and that is, be the Mike linebacker of this team and hopefully the Mike linebacker of the future, which we have not had since Smoke Dog Al Wilson, in the middle 2000s. So, I see what you're saying and I understand that. But at the same time, getting Brandon Marshall on the field, I agree. Let's get him in there on the nickel. But in base, do we want to? I mean, Irving had a great first week. I mean, he looked like an animal against the Colts. He played solid, I would say, versus the Chiefs, but not quite as dominant or prolific. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think Irving is really starting to settle in and could end up becoming one of the better. I mean, he's already one of the best run stopping Mike linebackers in the NFL just based on current stats and metrics. But I think he can become that also in fact and in reputation, provided the opportunity, continues to present itself to start.
I agree. I think he's going to be the starter. And it's just going to be an interesting dynamic to see how they mix in Brandon Marshall next to him, next to Irving, or even next to Trevathan. It's just going to be interesting to see how they do that, because if I'm a defensive coordinator, if I'm Jack Del Rio right now, that's exciting. That's a really exciting prospect. I mean, you could almost play a pseudo 3-4 defense with, say, Knighton, Ware, and Malik Jackson, your three defensive linemen, and then put Vaughn, Irving, Marshall, and Trevathan on the field at the same time. You could absolutely do that.
Yeah, that's interesting, and anyone who follows scheme and what they do on the field closely, sometimes they do run a 3-4 set. It just their base package is a 4-3, which is why they're considered a 4-3 team. But in today's NFL, where the passing game is basically has taken the lead and is front and center on teams' objectives each and every Sunday, a lot of times base defense ends up being nickel. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and this is a good problem to have. How do you get X amount of playmakers on the field? Which also, the catch-22 is also that with so many playmakers, why are we struggling to close teams out in the second half on defense?
Coaching.
So here we are, back to the age-old question.
Mm-hmm. Coaching.
Absolutely. And yeah, like I said, I took as much as I level John Fox, aka Foxy, I took a little bit of an exception to his kind of, or at least seeming nonchalance about the Broncos' second half, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where he kind of just took that approach: a win's a win. What's everyone complaining about? We're fine. Da 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 da. Hopefully, though, behind closed doors, they really are alarmed at what they're seeing and make the necessary changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to light a fire there, because next weekend, your first away game of the season, CenturyLink Field against the Seahawks. You gotta light a fire there. You've got to light a fire.
Yeah, and you got to capitalize on the emotion of the moment right now. I mean, since that terrible day in February, every time the Broncos have met for any form of organized team activities, they've been throwing out 35. As a way. I mean, the Broncos lost 43-8 by a spread of 35 points. So it's been reported, during training camp, OTAs, through the preseason, 35, they'd yell to each other to constantly remind themselves of what happened in February. And so obviously, we've seen all the stuff with the Broncos responding to the Seahawks talk, about how we were scared in the Super Bowl and yada, yada, yada. The emotion of the moment right now is something that needs to be harnessed and needs to be pointed in the right direction. And keeping that in mind with, hopefully improving on everything we've already talked about tonight, we could see a Broncos team come out and hit the ground running and just really show no mercy. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination we're going to see a repeat of the Super Bowl.
I no, I don't think we're going to see a repay. I don't think we're going to see 43-8 part 2. What I am concerned about is another flat performance, because if the defense comes out, the offense can't get out and establish the run. I mean, look at the game now. I mean, now we're kind of getting into a Seahawks preview here, but the Chargers, time of possession for the Seahawks, 43 minutes to 17. That's how you win the game. And if the Broncos get into an early hole, if that defense can't stand up early, Broncos can't get in, establish the run, they have to throw because they're behind, then you just play into their hands, game over.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk more about it later in the week, more in depth about what we can expect with the Seahawks. But yeah, I mean, these things are improvements the coaching staff needs to make. They need to make these adjustments. They got to get the running game going. They got to get that offensive line gelling, because, and that's another issue. I mean, here we have five guys on the offensive line, probably the least talented player being Manny Ramirez, and yet at center, and yet so far I would have to say he's been the most solid.
He's been the best, easily.
Yeah, I mean, you've got two All-Pros in Ryan Clady and Luis Vasquez. You've got arguably one of the best right tackles in the NFL, Orlando Franklin, who's played right tackle his first 3 years as a pro, moving inside to left guard, and then Chris Clark, who filled in for Ryan Clady at left tackle last year when he went down, swinging over to the right. And that, on paper, I defy you to find a better offensive line on paper anywhere else in the NFL. And again, they're struggling, but we have to keep in mind that, there's two players essentially that are playing new positions that they weren't playing last year in Franklin and Clark. And then we got to factor in that Clady is still getting his game legs underneath him, so to speak, after being gone from a year and recovering from his injury. So that unit, if the Broncos are going to have success in terms of ball control and pounding the opponent into submission, that unit really needs to get their stuff together quick.
Absolutely. That's going to be a huge area of focus for the Broncos moving forward, because if you can't establish the run game, you can't keep Manning off his back.
Absolutely. So hopefully, we see that coming to fruition. I've heard a lot over the last few days, too, the theory that the Broncos these last 2 weeks are playing possum, that we're seeing a team that is not wanting to show their hand, so to speak, to other NFL teams, especially the ones on the schedule, the Seahawks, the Niners, the Chargers, that they're kind of playing vanilla. They don't want to go too far in depth, put too much information on film for teams to break down. But, I don't buy that one bit. In the NFL, each and every game is so precious. Each and every game can have far-reaching ramifications when it comes to postseason tournament, seeding, you name it. NFL coaches just can't afford to think that way. So the whole idea that the Broncos, we're seeing these struggles because they're kind of just half, giving it half effort. I would counsel people to throw that theory completely out the window.
I think it's ridiculous, quite honestly, because who do we have at quarterback? Peyton Manning. He's probably the most competitive guy to play the game right now, arguably the most competitive guy to play the game ever. If you think for one moment he's going to sit back and let 2 games go by, I mean, he's so competitive, he chewed out a safety in the 3rd preseason game, DJ Swearinger.
Absolutely. Yep, and with some choice words, too, if you remember what DJ Swearinger said to reporters, what Manning actually said to him. But anyway, better not go down that path right now. But yeah, I mean, these games are just too important. That's not to say that based on scheme and based on teams that they might have spotlighted or kind of game plan from 10,000 feet, they might say, you know what, we're playing the Seahawks in week 3. There's some things that we want to do. Let's kind of hold back or do different versions of them. And then when we hit them in week 3, some of these things will be surprises. They won't be expecting it. But really what I'm saying is overall, and especially on the defensive side of the ball, the Broncos are not playing possum, holding anything back. But from a strategic point of view, obviously there's a lot of decisions that get made at the coaching level. as it pertains to game planning and basically presenting themselves on film for the opposition in the coming week.
Absolutely, definitely. And we will be bringing you a preview of that Seattle game coming up later this week, so stay tuned for that.
Absolutely, and but yeah, it's been great, and I just want to remind everybody to follow Luke on on Twitter at MHS Radio. You can follow me on Twitter at CJ_Broncos. Find us on Facebook at Mile High Huddle. Find us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle. Um, Luke and I are a couple of old faces in the Broncos blogosphere. A lot of you guys know who we are and have followed us and read our stuff. A lot of you don't. We're new to the Scout Network, and we're trying to get the word out on what we're doing here. So we'd appreciate it, if you tell your friends, like us on Facebook and Twitter, and help us get this thing going even stronger than we are now.
Absolutely. I mean, we're doing it for you. We're not just producing content for the feel good nature of it for ourselves. It's for the universe.
That's right, altruism, baby.
Yeah. For all of the universe. All right.
But yeah, so we'll be back later this week, Luke and I, to talk Seahawks. And then next week, everyone can expect the one and only Brandon Perna to start putting out some video content for your enjoyment. So look forward to that. And in the meantime, everybody take care and go Broncos.
Yeah. Perna next week. It's us for this week, and thanks for tuning in.